met there in Zurich, and also off time the Zurich course into the city, and we spent some time together. We had dinner maybe once together, and then we became a good friend. And I'm really happy to say that we enjoy a companionship, a friendship, and a professional relationship of more than 3 decades. So, as Michihiro also mentioned about the point that when we talk about tribute to the Zurich philosophy in the form of what Valavani saw through the catheters and angiogram shadow, the Yashagil saw the same thing under the microscope, more precisely, more accurately, and more beautifully, and in a color form. What we see is a gray-white scale. So the vision that we have is not very attractive. The vision the microsurgeon has is enormously attractive because it has many colors, many beauty, and more comprehensiveness. As Firdaus mentioned, that what we see on the screen, Devi probably also mentioned this point, that we emphasize this point, that what you see on the angiographic screen are just few vessels. That's it. And the important ones are all those vessels you don't see. So what you see is a cortical vessel, but you don't see the perforators, the radiculomedullary perforators from the cortical arteries. Don't see them at all. So those implications are very important to develop that. How do we develop the second vision? You have to have a simultaneous superimposed second vision. And this is what I learned from Valavan, is that how to create that vision in the background of your mind. And that is in the form of learning anatomy, microvascular anatomy, and functional vascular anatomy, so as to minimize your complications, your side effects, and improve your quality aspects of your immunity. This is the picture I had, probably this is the last communication anybody had with Professor Yashagil. This is just 1 month before he succumbed to his death. I was in Zurich and it happened to be that I had an opportunity to meet him at his house. I had a long time at the house. His wife, Diane, she made 2 or 3 rounds of tea for me and beautiful cakes. And I spent time with him for about 1 hour. And he was, because I've seen him in this vigor when we were in the 90s, when we were in Zurich at that time. He was a very powerful, strong man of a strong personality. And now he was, but he was sounding still very strong as far as the past memory is concerned. But he had a fragile, immediate memory. The recent memory was very fragile. So he was not remembering whether he had a breakfast in the morning or didn't have a breakfast. He would repeat that, oh, let us have a breakfast now. So Diane will say, it is now afternoon. We are going to have a tea now. So something like that. So these are the 2 major giants that we had. Along with it, I would like to mention Professor Hugo Fish, who was a strong contributor to the knowledge base and the philosophy that developed over in neurovascular sciences. Because his contribution cannot be denied, because he was exclusively performing the surgeries of one of the most difficult lesions of the skull base, that is the Clown's tumors. Right? These are paraganglioma, they are highly vascular tumor, so vascular they look like an AV malformation. Like you touch them and they bleed like hell. So you can't see anything, you can't operate upon. So how do you operate upon them? And this trio, Professor Yashagil, Hugo Fish, and Valavanis, they developed a beautiful approach and a classification of these paragangliomas, which is still followed as a Fish classification. Still today, there is no substitute to this classification. And because it's a very comprehensive classification to define the approaches and define the completeness of the product, the neurosurgery and define the strategy of management as a combined endovascular and surgical approach. So the scope of the neurointervention since that time in the early 90s has expanded enormously, especially with the advent of acute stroke intervention, which is now we call them mechanical thrombectomy, carotid stenting or intravenous stenting, and so on and so forth. We have seen enormous changes in the management of aneurysm, particularly from early days of just endovascular coiling to now several devices which are intracellular or intraluminal, like in the form of flow diverters or web devices and so on and so forth. Different is that there is explosion, and this was known. I remember that Professor Valavanis, and especially along with talking with Professor Syakir, would mention this point, that these are the challenges that you are facing because the development will come through the industry. So industry participation in science is very important. But he cautioned us at that time that beware of the fact that once it is developed, there will be explosion of the industry to bring many devices which are actually not useful sometimes, or maybe not necessary to replace the existing one, because that would be more expensive, they would be probably looking more eloquent, and they would be probably not as useful as the simple method that you are developing now. And this after almost like more than 2 decades later, I can appreciate that thought and vision. This is exactly what we are facing today. There is literally an explosion of the industry. You have for aneurysm now 10 or 15 different strategies to manage an aneurysm, and it's very, very confusing in a way. And why it is confusing? Because the background philosophy and background understanding is lacking in the new generation. Partly consciously, partly unconsciously. Unconsciously because of the fact that they have no exposure to the Zurich courses, what we had in the past. And consciously because the industry has a clear view onto it to take you into a particular direction, which is favorable to them also. So this scientific industrial conflict is an integral part of our evolution. And it is the physician which is the most important person in the middle, not the patient, because the patient is not understanding anything. Whatever you ask the patient to do, he agrees for that. And on the other side, the management side of the hospital, which is linked to the more inclined or maybe equally inclined towards the other side, which is what you may call it the industrial or the commercial interest. So as a physician, you have a very enormous responsibility. And here I would like to bring in the philosophy or the strong point of ethics that Luc Picard inculcated. Luc Picard was a person who was always taking a 1-hour lecture in practically all World Federation meetings on ethics, morality, and discipline of neurointervention practices. And I tell you that this was the most attended lectures I have seen every time. It was a plenary session. It would be fully occupied. This was an exceptional thing for me because this can only happen in neurosciences. If you go to any cardiac science meeting, in such lecture you will not find 10 people there in a meeting of 1,000 people. So there is a fundamental difference between these approaches, and I'll come to that philosophical point which Valavanis often talked about very loudly, very clearly, very emphatically. So this evolution became possible with one of very interesting evolution which happened in early 70s. This is a Russian scientist, neuroscientist, Serbinenko. He was a neurosurgeon from Burdensko Neurological Institute in Moscow. So there were large, giant aneurysms which were difficult to be clipped surgically. In this regard, he shook the world of neurosurgery by developing a technique called the detachable balloon used in the management of these aneurysm cases, which was published in Journal of Neurosurgery in 1974. And this idea of developing this balloon, he derived from in a Moscow Square, Red Square. On one of the National Day celebration, he saw the children playing with this helium-filled balloon, flying into the sky, tied with a small rope. And he saw this idea and he clicked into his mind. And he went to his operating room, took a latex balloon, latex of the what you call the gloves, and he